Welcome to the Medical Alley webinar series, Bringing the Future Forward. I'm your host, Shay Mandel, President and CEO of the Medical Alley Association. Today's episode, The Patient Will See You Now, moving from patient to consumer centricity. And we are thrilled to have a distinguished panel that includes Lisa Lavin, founder, chairman and CEO of OhmCare, Lonnie Stormo, CEO of Pops Diabetes Care, and Jared Sealing, founder and CEO of Channel Health. For our audience, please use the Zoom Q&A function. We will be taking questions from the audience, and we'll do our best to get to your questions as we move through the program. We have lived in a world where the doctor-patient relationship was almost entirely exercised in person in a clinical setting. Innovators, like our panelists, have envisioned a world where the convenience and cost savings consumers experience in other industries is brought to healthcare by delivering care anywhere. But there have been continued roadblocks and institutional issues. Perhaps the COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to see what's possible and accelerated transformation. Maybe not. Today, we will talk about where we are and where we're going. And I'd love to start the program by asking each of our panelists just to briefly introduce themselves. And Lisa, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Shay. Really a pleasure to be here today. I am CEO of OhmCare. We're a digital health company that is pioneering a product platform that enables remote care in the home and promises right medication, right time, right person. Our whole goal is to actually increase access to healthcare, to increase caregiver efficiency, to reduce cost, and increase health. So that's what we're all about. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Lisa. Lonnie, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been part of this Medical Alley Association ecosystem for a long time with my previous career at Medtronic. And I left Medtronic 5 years ago as one of the co-founders and CEO of Pops. And what we intended to do with Pops was exactly what this topic is about. Essentially flip the healthcare model around and say, this is no longer about patients being taken care of by physicians. This is about you taking care of yourself using the right experience. And I think that's one of the keys here is Pops is about creating a consumer experience where people can manage their own diabetes in their own hand with their AI virtual coach, Mina. And we combine with Mina a simple way to measure blood sugar with the Pops Rebel meter. And so now we're offering to people that type of solution in their hands to allow them as people to take care of their condition.
Love it. And we're going to get into all that today, of course. Jared, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you. And thanks again to Medical Alley. These events are really great. So Channel Health is focused on patients with heart disease, and specifically that time frame where they've had an acute event, a heart attack or a procedure, when they go home and they start to recover. 30% of those patients end up back in the hospital within that 30-day window. So really a high-risk population that needed to be addressed. And looking at those issues to today's topic, the well-proven therapy for those patients was cardiac rehab. But 80% of patients didn't go, largely because of what we consider the form factor. They had to go back to the hospital 3 days a week for 12 weeks. And that's just not real practical when you have to work or, you have to get back to your daily life. So we introduced a virtual cardiac rehab program. We work with hospital systems to deliver that from the time the patient is discharged on into beyond that 30-day window, but more like that 90-day, 6-month window as well. So excited to talk about this here today.
Thank you all. Again, we are thrilled to have you. So we're going to jump in for our audience. If you've attended in the past, I am going to encourage our panelists to talk over each other, debate their perspectives, and leave all of you with a great deal of knowledge. So let's just start with the distinction between patients and consumers. Have they been the same, or are they becoming the same? How are you looking at those distinctions and absence of them? Jump on in.
Go ahead and jump in.
Ronnie's leaning.
Opinion about this. So as I've said to people making fun of my receding hairline, my receding hairline doesn't make me a patient any more than my diabetes makes me a patient. I'm a person, and I think that's what most of us would think. All of us have something we're dealing with in our lives, whether it's your receding hairline or your high blood pressure or whatever. And if we considered every one of those conditions to make us a patient, we'd all be patients. I have no problem when somebody's going into a clinic or into a hospital to be taken care of to be a patient. But as people just trying to live our lives, we won't allow the word patient to be used in our company, because we think the fundamental way that healthcare needs to change is that we need to first think of these as people, as consumers. And as soon as you start using the word patient, you've completely missed the point already.
I love it. Missing the point. Jared, Lisa, what do you think? Are we missing the point?
It's so funny because, in our product development process over the years, we have completely avoided the word patient. It's just not a term that we use. As Lonnie very eloquently stated, I mean, this is a person, and no different than me or you in any circumstance. We are a consumer, and this just happens. The service and the product just happens to be healthcare.
Yeah, I often think about it in terms of choice, right? When you're a patient, you don't often think you have a choice. You go to the doctor, they tell you to do something, you do it or you don't do it. The consumer aspect is you have a choice between options. You can do something that's more involved or less involved, or not do it at all. And I think as we see more solutions that spread across a more, into the patient's home and more convenience and more accessible, the choice becomes important. And so to then meet that need, you need to think about more from the consumer perspective.
Yeah, I like the combination of something I think both Lisa and Jared said, which is these are consumers choosing a healthcare product. And as Jared said, there could be 10 of these healthcare products, and we should all be competing to make the best product. And that's how healthcare is going to get better. And I think when you start thinking about it that way, it starts to shift your whole mindset around how do you think about healthcare and healthcare innovating and so forth. So a consumer picking a product, I really liked how Lisa said that.
All right, so you guys are on the leading edge. You're all in on consumer centricity. Healthcare isn't, or at least historically hasn't been. And while we always put the patient first, as we've mentioned, it's always the patient. So, this may be a little bit of boil the ocean, but what needs to happen to transition healthcare as we've known it to be recognizing that these are healthcare consumers and not patients?
Well, I think it's underway. I think COVID-19 actually expedited that process, because, all of a sudden healthcare now, I have to select it and I am going to pull it toward me versus me going to it wherever somebody tells me where to go. So I've had to really take I'm speaking for the ocean here. I've had to be, selective now and do my own research on okay, well, who am I going to see now remotely? So yeah, I mean, it's become more consumer centric just by nature of the pandemic.
So I'm glad you mentioned the pandemic, Lisa. Didn't know if that would come up today, of course. But so has the pandemic provided a lot of the proof points on tele and digital health that accelerate this shift, or are we just going to go back to the way things were when this is over?
I think there's a lot of elements to it, kind of back to your last question, not to get too far down the road, but I'm sure we'll come back to reimbursement and payment models. And that's a big aspect of it too. And I think ultimately my thinking is that's at the end of the day, what's needed is some shift in how we align our incentives between the different groups and stakeholders. But what I think the pandemic did, at least in the area we're in, is because it was sort of forced upon, it alleviated a lot of those mind blocks on, patients won't accept this, or doctors won't accept this, or we can't fit this into our workflow. And because we had to do it very rapidly, we showed that it's possible. We showed that patients can do it and doctors can use it and we can adapt our workflows. So I think that it's the wheels have been greased there for sure. And it's just some of the bigger mechanics in the payment that can need to follow.
One of the things I adding on to what he said, but with both of your questions in mind, Shay, that you talked about in terms of what do we need to do differently to think about a consumer first, and then what's the pandemic brought? I think to Jared's point, the pandemic caused the idea of digital health and telehealth to move forward substantially in the last 9 months. There's no doubt about that. But because those were systems that I believe were developed more with patient in mind than consumer in mind, it was a bit of a forced, adoption, and not always working the way a consumer would expect it to work. And as one specific example of that, I talked to one physician who, trying to do telehealth visits, said that their system was so hard to navigate that 75% of his telehealth visits ended up with the patient talking to him over a phone, right? So, I mean, we abandoned basically what is intended to be telehealth and went back to the most basic thing we have, the telephone, because that system wasn't built with the consumer in mind and understanding that this broad base of consumers need to be able to navigate this, security and all the other things. And I think that's what we need to do differently if we want these things to stick, is start with the consumer in mind versus starting with a traditional kind of healthcare patient kind of mentality.
You know what I've heard, just to dovetail on that, Lonnie, is that the genie has been let out of the bottle, or the toothpaste is out of the tube, and it's not going back in. I was reading Fair Health Report on this, and they said that we've seen a 4,000% increase in telehealth visit claims. And what some are saying is 80 to 90% of outpatient visits can be now done remotely. And so I believe that we've seen something happen here that's going to stick. And what we're hoping for is that the CMS waivers that were put out to be able to give us more freedom to do telehealth and reimburse for the same as being in-person visit, that's going to stick as well.
For sure, one of the things that's going to help make it stick is that whether it's the investment community, for us as smaller companies, maybe taking in private investment, or the, healthcare industry, the payers and so forth of the world, they see that this can work and that this can be a better way and a more efficient way and so forth. And so I don't think there's any going back on that. I still believe, though, as I mentioned earlier, that some of the stuff is going to have to be redesigned from a different perspective to really make it stick long term. So it's essentially like we opened up the door, but we haven't really created the experience we need to create yet.
One of the things on the demand side, we always said, a lot of the consumers, the demand, and if they have a choice, they can go to a different place. And in healthcare, they didn't typically have that. You would go to your primary, wherever your primary care is, you'd go there for a checkup or a specialist, and you just kind of go with what was comfortable. But now that consumers are getting familiar with some of these tools and their options, I know people who go now search out who's the best virtual visit, and I'm just going to go, to my local hospital or specialist based on some of those capabilities. So it's actually a way to kind of, for the hospitals, and as they start to see that, they need to invest in that more.
Right. So you all have outlined like 5 great things that we totally want to get into, but I want to grab the reimbursement issue, Lisa, that all of you've referred to, but you mentioned lastly. So there have been a lot of changes during the pandemic around reimbursement that have accelerated and empowered tele and digital health. So I told all of you I was going to kind of give you the forum to do this. So each of you make your pitch for why we need to make permanent a lot of these changes and how they've really had an impact on accelerating your company and healthcare generally. Legislators are listening. Let's sell them.
Well, there's been a lot of conversation about healthcare equity, right? And to me, for us, that is a big piece of what we're trying to do, where we're trying to use technology to be a conduit for care rather than a barrier of care, where we can increase access for everybody. And because oftentimes healthcare is not accessible to everybody. So I would say, first and foremost, I believe that telehealth actually can increase access as long as we continue to work on Wi-Fi bandwidth accessibility, because 1 in 4 farmers does not have access to Wi-Fi. And so that's been a barrier for them. So for us, this has made healthcare less expensive and more accessible. And that those two things in and of themselves should drive those changes to be permanent.
Yeah, I think that my pitch would be along the same lines. It's access and utilization and cost savings. It's getting access to the right people who need it. It's utilizing the resources that are there more effectively, and then ultimately bringing costs down. And just the way that things are structured, living in a predominantly fee-for-service world. I mean, for 3 years, we've been working with organizations who say, yes, this will reduce the cost. Yes, it's the same or better care for the patient, but we're not reimbursed for it. And so when all those stars align, that's really what's needed, and everybody benefits from it.
And if I was, adding on to that and making my pitch, if you just look at diabetes cost as one example, because that's what we're closest to, where people with diabetes are costing the system 4 times more than a person without diabetes, but more than half of that is because of uncontrolled diabetes. And so, the system as it's set up today with, a physician taking care of a patient, it isn't working very well because mostly those patients are basically out living their life. They're not spending their time in a clinic office. And so when you can bring forward a digital health solution, whether it's telehealth as one step, or we take it a step further than that, allowing people to take care of themselves using their AI virtual coach, now all of a sudden you create an experience where people will better manage their condition, whether it's diabetes or something else, and they'll start to address that uncontrolled costs. And so I think when you start to think about giving people a better experience, they're going to more choose to manage whatever condition they have. And that's going to be the biggest addressing of costs, in my opinion.
Let's talk a little bit about costs, because I think instinctively all of us see the capabilities that you all bring to the table as part of the cost solution. Having said that, there are plenty of folks out there making decisions, including our public sector, that might be thinking, digital health isn't a solution to our cost problem. It's an additional driver. It's an add-on. It's more. And while we might understand the per visit cost component, we're just adding more on, and we're paying the same, and that's one of our reimbursement challenges. So give everybody a little more deeper dive on what are the components that need to be true to really realize those cost savings, and what would you tell them if they said, this is just more stuff for everybody we have to pay for?
Yeah, if I could start by just tagging on to what I just said. So if we can quit looking at things as kind of a fee for service, like, well, you have a doctor visit that costs $100. Now you're going to add a digital solution that costs $50 or whatever the number might be. And instead look at that total cost, and with a digital health solution coming out, are we addressing that total cost? I think that's the way we need to think about it differently, as opposed to just saying, oh, we're adding another service, now we got another fee. And hopefully that's what people can kind of get beyond. And I think that's what digital health really allows. In addition to the other part that I would throw into the consumer's cost of healthcare, with digital health, I may not have to take time off of work. I may not have to drive downtown to get an appointment, pay for parking, take 3 hours out of my life, or get my loved one to bring me down there. Now, digital health takes all that costs out of the consumer's pocket too. So hopefully, people that are looking at that question you bring up are looking at the bigger picture.
And I think that the bigger picture, to your point, has to do with clinical value, right? And you have to look at the whole health economics of a particular, let's just use diabetes, a disease process. If you just look at, well, that widget is more expensive. And doing telehealth via that platform might be more expensive, but you understand the bigger impact and the clinical value and the cost savings overall for that particular consumer, then all of a sudden it makes sense. But I think we need to look at clinical value, and we've got to stop looking at just that incremental increase up front.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of efficiencies too. On top of that, I think the big picture is very important. Obviously, we rely on that in our area. Preventing one readmission is, pretty much worth the cost of delivering this to, 100 patients. And so it's focusing on some of those high cost episodes. And if you can prevent those down the road, that's important. But on our end, we also look at the staff efficiencies. So how many visits or how many patients can one staff member work with at a time? And if patients are coming in, there's the transition time, there's the, hooking them up to the monitors and doing all that. And a lot of that can be done up front, it can be done automated, and then you're allowing your care provider to focus on the actual relationship and actually understanding what that patient needs and getting better information.
And, I'd love to just say something about extending the reach of caregivers and the shortage of caregivers, right? If you just think about even seniors that are going to need care, our senior population is growing 10,000 people every single day. And so the number of people that are going to need care are on a hockey stick growth, but the number of caregiver growth is flat. We've got to figure out ways that we're going to be able to use these same resources, because they're not growing, in a more efficient manner. And that's another piece of the puzzle, I think.
And a critical piece. So you all have alluded to a few different sort of barriers to this revolution, from reimbursement. Lisa, you tapped in a little bit to infrastructure and equity, and I definitely do want to come back because I think those are critical issues as well. But I want to talk a little bit about, sort of these consumer expectations and experiences. So consumer companies are great at experience. Healthcare has not traditionally. And so one of the, I'll say arguments, or, for those who, aren't supporting this kind of growth, and Jared, I know you've tapped into this a little bit, our patient population doesn't understand how to use these tools. They're not tech savvy. So overarching question, does the digital health experience, does it make healthcare more complicated for patients? Or does this really improve simplicity, accessibility, and can we get to a place where we can have a quality experience so that the consumer is making this choice instead of being forced into it?
I think as developers, it was our number one design criteria, is it had to be easy. So easy to use, one touch call, one touch access to care. And so because we stand on the foundation that we are creating technology to be a conduit, not a barrier to health. But I get it. There's a lot of technology out there that has been really complicated. And even if you just think about these telehealth visits that have been happening, and I've heard more and more people just talk about, I couldn't even get logged in. And even the physician couldn't even get logged in. We're starting to see more and more ease of use, but it needs to be, it needs to grow.
Yeah, I think,
go ahead, Lonnie.
If you could time travel back 15 years and listen to what I'm sure the critics said about, people will never shop online. Amazon's crazy. People want to go to a store. They want to get that experience. People can't figure out all this technical stuff, and entering credit cards online is crazy, right? And obviously, coming back to this time, we all know that's, that whole industry has been completely transformed by building a consumer experience, regardless of the critics of, the technology is too difficult. And the same thing, it's inevitable. It's going to be true in healthcare too. It happened in the banking industry. It happened in the retail industry. It's happening in the travel industry. How could we be so naive or arrogant to sit here in the healthcare industry and say, they can't figure it out? Everybody's figured it out. And who's figured it out is the consumer-oriented companies. So we all better be a little worried about that if we're not going to take it on ourselves.
Yeah, I think the initial thought is there's a subset of people who won't use this, and then they think, well, so we can't use it at all, which is, that's not the right way to use it. Even if only 50% of people could use it, if we're benefiting, if we're saving costs, if we're giving more value, that's worth it. And then the other thing is the ability for these patients to grow, to be able to use it. We have a lot of stories where patients didn't even have a smartphone, and they got it just so they could enroll in a virtual rehab program. And then they started using it for other things, and they kind of got into it, and they learned because of the value they got. And so, similar with Lisa's product, if it's easy enough, if it's accessible enough, and they have the motivation, they're going to use it.
Alana, you mentioned the consumer companies, and I always feel like this is probably less and less a provocative topic, it seems like. But we have great consumer focused companies here in Medical Alley and Best Buy and Target. Everybody's trying to get into healthcare, right? Lyft and Facebook. Everybody's got a chief medical officer. So I'll say kind of a two-part question. One, should those of us who are truly in healthcare be afraid of these companies? And then secondly, for all of you who are doing things differently and focused on the patient experience, the consumer experience, I'm sorry, are you more interested in working with those companies than some of the traditional companies you might be working with today?
Well, that's a provocative question at the end.
And you can say you love them all, right? But take us in the mindset of where you see things going. But should traditional healthcare companies be afraid of these companies, and how excited might you be to work with some of these consumer companies?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think if we're going to try to treat ourselves the same way we've always treated ourselves as a healthcare industry, then yes, we should be afraid. For the reason I just mentioned earlier, is retailers thought the same thing 15 years ago. So I personally see that there's this whole healthcare industry universe out here that typically is more of the regulated space, thinking about reimbursement and all these things. And then on the other part of the universe, you have all these healthcare consumer companies. You mentioned Best Buy, Target, Amazon, obviously, who have traditionally stayed out of that regulated space and reimbursement and tried to get into fitness and wellness and things like that. The two are coming together, though. And I would like to think that companies like Lisa Jared's and mine are kind of coming into the middle of that. And you're right. It'll be interesting to see, who likes us best, right? I mean, the consumer companies where we've been thinking about consumers first, or the healthcare companies where we are clearly in the healthcare industry. I don't know which one of those is going to win, but I do believe that the healthcare industry needs to more quickly move towards this consumer way of thinking, because if we underestimate how fast the consumer health companies will move, I think we'll see the same change we saw in the retail industry happen.
So I just take a slightly different approach. I say, bring it on. Bring on the disruption. Bring it on, because what Amazon is doing, and just announced Amazon Pharmacy, after the PillPack acquisition, the ground shook, right? The formation of Haven Health, when you're bringing JP Morgan and Berkshire Hathaway and Amazon together and putting this consortium together. I mean, the ground shook then and continues to shake, and they continue to make other people's stock value sneeze a little bit, right? And so you're seeing those responses, and those responses in the market space. And I think about United Health Group, for example, just acquiring DiviDose to compete directly against PillPack that was acquired by Amazon. These things are really, really important, and they're impactful, and I think helpful from a competitive standpoint, from a disruption standpoint.
Yeah, I follow a rising tide raises all ships kind of mentality as well. And we see groups who, during the sales process, they're referencing those things. And so seeing those things succeed, I think we all do this because there's unmet needs in healthcare. And I think if they can solve some of those needs, great. There's no shortage of unmet needs in healthcare, and our companies can continue to evolve to find those. But I think they just kind of elevate the digital space altogether.
Having said that, if I could, be a little more provocative, to our industry, not because I'm against it, because I wanted to adapt, similar to what you're saying. One of the things that anchors the healthcare industry is kind of the risk profile that healthcare industry is typically taken on, right? I mean, whether you got regulated products, kind of thinking about, fitting within reimbursement, HIPAA, all the different things that these consumer companies might not be quite as thinking about or anchored by. And one of the things I think the healthcare industry will have to do, even if it wants to, adapt because of the rising tide, and I totally buy into that, is figure out how to address that risk profile, because it is not the risk profile of these healthcare industries companies today to say, yep, let's change. I mean, that's just not where we're at.
Yeah, as I've talked to folks over the last few years, I think if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I really thought healthcare is harder than tech. And places like Medical Alley are going to win because ultimately tech can't replicate the expertise that we have. I think part of what you guys are talking about that's really important in a realization is value-based medicine is ultimately about choice, and choice is going to be driven by experience. And so, if we think big tech companies are going to win, part of that equation is capturing and creating brand loyalty with consumers, right? So a lot of our healthcare products are recommended by a physician, right? You don't necessarily have that kind of relationship with med tech companies and pharma companies and biotech companies in the way that you do with social media companies. So I think the conversation keeps changing, and I appreciate you guys are the ones driving it. So a little bit of a, we'll call this a little more in the weeds question, but so as tech companies, are continuing to come into the healthcare system, our provider and patient adoption of these new technologies, part of the problem is, there really isn't standardized platform. So, how can innovators like you and tech companies coming into healthcare, work to standardize platforms that can really speed adoption on the provider and patient side?
Oh, that is so spot on with, I think, some of the pain that is happening right now, both on the provider side as well as the consumer side. I'm just talking to a provider today that said, okay, can you integrate with my EMR? Because I need that to happen, right? But there's a number of EMRs out there, right? And so how do you choose? We took the agnostic approach to be an open architecture where we can create the hooks and the APIs and the connections as much as we need to. But having said that, there are so many different platforms out there that it's confusing. I have to say, I have a lot of empathy for the healthcare provider that has to understand so many of them in order to be able to serve up their service. So it's challenging, and I don't know if there's an easy answer, because there needs to be interconnectivity and some standardization of platforms.
Yeah, and you look at the beginning of any kind of S-curve kind of change, and there's always messiness like we're experiencing right now. And I think your point is spot on, and no single person is going to be able to, change that very easily. And I don't know, what I think you typically see happen when we start to get standardization is one of two things. Either the industry gets together and says, hey, we need an association like Medical Alley to create a standard, right? So that we can all kind of use one standard like USB. Or you see one of the really big players, again, whether it's a United Health Group or an Amazon, in this case, I don't know, start to be the standard. And then everybody says, okay, I'm going to do that. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't know. I think it takes one of those two things, though, to kind of get some of the messiness out of there.
Yeah, I think some of the changes proposed for better accessibility will start to develop around that. I mean, my thinking is kind of it's been less of a tech issue than it has been kind of a regulatory and culture issue with some of these integrations. From our perspective, there's companies out there that we can work with, and so our tech doesn't change, and they help us integrate with all these different provider systems and EMRs. But it's just to get their buy-in so much on their end, and they don't really have an incentive to do it. So to us, kind of putting that as a requirement, I think will help start to drive the innovation and ease of use in that space.
So I think, Lonnie, challenge accepted, right? Maybe that's something that we get people together around. I do want to talk about access and equity. I think one of the great promises of being able to meet people where they are is increasing access and improving equity. Having said that, we have a great clinical infrastructure in this country for the in-person visit. But I think you'll all agree that we do not have a digital health infrastructure in this country to meet the promises. And so, I'd love your thoughts on what some of those barriers are. And Lisa, you mentioned farmers, and I probably talked about Land Lakes, but as we look at a new infrastructure bill coming from our federal government, or what Minnesota is planning to do, is digital health infrastructure in this country, in our state, as critical as any infrastructure we should be looking at.
And if we could start with just broadband. And I'm going to use the term Wi-Fi because I don't believe that the fiber is necessarily going to be the be all end all of how we're going to get people Wi-Fi access. We just recently joined a consortium that Land O'Lakes is working on. And what great effort Land O'Lakes is making to increase Wi-Fi access to rural America, because that's one of the biggest barriers. If we could just start there, and then we get to, well, let's also help them get the technology that they need to have access as well. And then ultimately also reimbursement for technology and solutions as well. Those three things I think are just really pivotal.
Yeah, I think that's the foundation, obviously, that you need when we're talking digital health and access is to get it. But we see a lot of groups, you know, when we're looking at those kind of underserved populations, they are pretty familiar. You know, there's exceptions, obviously, you know, rural farmer, you know, access to smartphones, things like that. But a lot of groups do have this technology, and it can alleviate that transportation issue. It can alleviate that having to take off work or find childcare. So I think that the infrastructure is, yes, we need the access to the core technology, but it's that adoption of the providers and making it more accessible.
One element that I always talk about is, if we talk about just inclusivity, you know, no bias and so forth, a digital virtual assistant, you know, whatever it might be, is the perfect, you know, solution when it comes to inclusivity, right? I mean, there's no inherent bias against, you know, a female versus a male or one race versus another race. And so I think that's one of the benefits digital health can offer for us in the future, is that, you know, there's just a more acceptance of all people and not individuals. When it comes to access, though, of technology, kind of like Lisa and Jared talked about, one of the things I would emphasize, especially for any legislatures or other people that are, you know, listening to this, is that, you know, if 75% of the people have access and 25% don't, let's not only focus on trying to get the other 25%. Let's provide the access to the 75% who have it, right? And I think sometimes we get so hung up on who can't get it, we forget about the fact that the majority can benefit from it, and let's not hold that up.
Love it. So one of the questions from our audience, and you know, there's been a thread of this experience that a patient or consumer has throughout this conversation. But one of the questions is, you know, what would you say to people who think a digital health or a telehealth experience is impersonal, that they don't trust it? And during this time in particular, when we've had a lot more digital health interactions, are we collecting data and information that would help us to be convinced that in fact people aren't having that impersonal and untrustworthy experience?
You know, Shay, to me, in part, this speaks to synchronous versus asynchronous care. So I get, you know, how an asynchronous experience where I send a message, they send a message back, and feels so impersonal. And I've had it. It wasn't fun. But then I would also say, you know, if anybody's ever experienced a Zoom and how life can be, I know we're not face to face, but there's still heart there, and there's still the human there that's looking eye to eye. And to me, that really makes a huge difference. To make telehealth more personal is that video aspect.
I think that's really important. I had this conversation earlier today, is that a Zoom face-to-face video call is more personal than a masked conversation in person, because you kind of don't realize how much the bottom portion of your face can convey so much information. So I think it definitely, the video is a key component. And again, that's kind of on the vendor to the technology to help facilitate that and make them able to focus on the relationship during that time, rather than asking questions, you know, on a clipboard type of thing.
I feel like I'm the person that keeps bringing up history, but I'm going to, use one more kind of not historic. If you go back 5 or 10 years only, when we were telling our kids, gosh, why don't you go out and play with your friends instead of doing online gaming with them, or, Facebook chats and those kinds of things. And now look how that's been adopted across the board, even by the older generations and so forth. So I think, we always think that, you have to talk to somebody to have such a good meeting. We used to think a year ago that we had to fly to go have a business meeting with somebody. And now I think none of us think that's going to come back into, full the realm. We're going to be doing meetings like this all the time. So, I think sometimes we overplay the fact that we have to have a personal interaction. But having said that, I will say that, I think digital health, whether it's asynchronous, synchronous, or even true like virtual assistants that are digitally, are only one element of healthcare. And then I always think there will be the element of healthcare where a patient goes in and sees a physician, and I said patient on purpose there, and actually has an in-person conversation. If you're, God forbid, diagnosed with cancer, that's going to be a conversation you're going to want to have. And I totally get that. So we're never going to replace those kind of interactions.
Shay, one of the other topics you brought up was kind of that infrastructure, the clinical infrastructure that we have in place. And I always like to use the parallel of Target, because they're a Minnesota company here. They had all the buildings, and as things were moving to, delivery shopping and online shopping, they had to transition. And they've seemed to find this fix of, I can go in the store, I can drive up and they bring it out to me, or they deliver it to my door, or they, locally, or they deliver it from online. And they found this right mix. It's the most convenience for the consumer, and it works for them. And I think that's the mix that these providers need to figure out. Is there's going to be some things you got to go in for. There's going to be some things you can do, remotely or quicker, and just it takes a bit of time to find that balance.
I think, Lonnie, you specifically said the word replacement. Jared, you're talking about this, Lisa, as well. And I know when we had done our call before, Jared, you'd said a couple interesting things in this space. So I do want to prompt you all on it. So, of course, there are people who are afraid that the digital health revolution is here to replace the in-person experience and what they have known healthcare to be. Tell those people what your companies bring to the table that isn't a replacement, but in fact, from your perspective, is the enhancement to their experience.
Yeah, we see what we're doing as a total complement to what's happening in person in healthcare. Just use diabetes again as an example. 95% of people with diabetes go see a primary care physician. There's a huge shortage of primary care physicians across the country. And yet people are going into their primary care physician for very routine kind of things, a routine conversation. What if instead you provided that very routine stuff through a digital virtual assistant like Pops offers, and then supplement that when you need to actually talk to a primary care physician about something that's more complicated in your life or a complication you're having from diabetes? Now it becomes a true kind of elevated level of what care you need. So at the foundation level, you get this digital virtual assistant. You need some help, you get on a telehealth chat with a diabetes educator or physician, or you need more help, you go into a clinic and you actually see a physician. That's the way I think we should be thinking about digital health.
So I think about a couple things. Lonnie, to your point, complementary, I think, is really a key word here, where the digital health complements that serve the face-to-face healthcare that needs to occur as well. If I just think about dialysis patients, right? What is happening today is somebody goes in once a month for dialysis treatment, but then all of a sudden there's no touch points in between. And they're seeing the risk and, sometimes the rehospitalization or some of the treatment failures happening because they don't have the touch points. If they could just have that nice, easy touch point using technology, a telehealth platform such as ourselves of home care, then all of a sudden we have increased and better outcomes and better caregiver efficiency. In the same respect, today, so to do real medication adherence today, you got to show up at somebody's door, you're going to hand them the medication, watch them take it. And that's just not very feasible from a financial standpoint and time standpoint and efficiency of caregivers standpoint. So now we can do this now remotely. We can deliver medication, have visual confirmation of right med, right time, right person. That to us is game changing and complementary to the whole healthcare ecosystem.
Yeah, I think one of the words we haven't used as much as we usually use is behaviors and patient and consumer behaviors. And you're not, when you go talk to your doctor and they tell you to do something, you don't just do that. You have to build a habit. to take your medications. You have to change your behavior to reduce your salt intake if you have, heart issues. And so those are things, just by adding more touch points and more automated capabilities, patient education, engagement tools. Those are things that those are additions that you can't get out of a face-to-face meeting. You can set the plan and you can set the guideline, but you can't help empower that patient because you're not there next to them. And some of these tools, by going into the home, integrating into your life a little bit more, kind of unlock that empowering capability.
So go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add on to what Jared said, because of I smiled when you said it, because I remember a primary care focus group. We had a primary care physician focus group we had, where the unanimous opinion was, I know when my patients leave my office, they completely forget what I just talked about. And what you're talking about is that complement can actually be keeping those behaviors alive for those people once they leave the physician's office.
So I was going to say, I love when we have panelists that are complete mind readers show up here. So Jared, as you started talking, I was about to ask the question. We've had several questions coming in from the audience, drawing the distinction between healthcare and sick care, and asking a lot of questions about behavior change, which everyone understands is a huge problem, but traditional healthcare hasn't been great at solving. And so one of the questions is, can each of you speak really a little more directly to how the ease of engagement and the constant access to patients where they are clearly changing individual behaviors and changing those health-related choices?
Well, I think telehealth is a key word here, isn't it? What we're trying to do is we're trying to prevent bad things from happening. So, we know today 50% of people that are taking medication are not adherent. And it's one of the most common reasons why people are hospitalized. When we can help people take the right med at the right time, we can help them prevent hospitalization and getting sick. So this is all about maintaining health. And I see every single one of us here on this panel is doing the same thing, maintaining health, so that people aren't sick and don't need the sick care.
Yeah, one of the things I was going to say is, I think one of the benefits that a live interaction has with a person is that live physician or nurse or whoever it might be can treat you differently, Shay, than Lisa's going to be treated, than Jared's going to be treated. And one of the keys to digital health is to continue to bring along that personalization, whether it's through a telehealth visit, not treating everybody the same. And how do you read Shay versus Lisa in that telehealth visit, or whether it's with a true digital health solution, where a virtual assistant is helping you, and it's not an app that treats everybody the same, but one that personalizes to each one of you. And I think the digital health solutions that can create that personalization, because you're more motivated to take care of your health than you are, is going to be one of the keys to that behavior change and how we make that happen.
Yeah, I think along this thread of kind of treating the patient as a consumer and as a person, you kind of look at kind of economic theory, where it used to be based on a rational consumer, and now it's kind of behavioral economics. We know people make irrational decisions, and we have to accommodate what we're telling them to do based on that. And I think healthcare is still kind of stuck in this rational patient kind of model, where if I tell you to do this to lower your blood pressure, you leave my office and I know it's going to happen, but it doesn't happen. And so that we need to provide them with tools. Even if they want it to happen, they still need tools, they need support, they need guidance, they need reminders. And I think those are the things that we can start to build into it.
So one of our audience members wants to ask you all the question, how has a move to a more value-based healthcare system impacted your companies? And what's your opinion of the speed of the move to value or lack thereof? Who wants to jump in first? Everyone's smiling. I like it.
I can start with it's slow. I mean, on paper, you go to a provider who's in a bundle agreement, for a cardiac procedure. And it looks like they've said, we're going to take on this risk. We're going to try to manage our costs. We're going to, manage this population. But in practice, we have not seen many things change due to that. because there's a lot of different stakeholders. You know, changing the frontline operations and workflows is different than sort of the back office stuff. And so getting a mechanism like that in place is step one. Letting it sort of trickle down and sort of work its way into the culture is another thing. And we've just seen that happening fairly slow. Slow enough that it's not, you know, an area that it's our key focus anymore. Even though it kind of looks like we would be a great solution for those agreements, they just haven't taken shape as we've hoped.
Yeah, I think when Jared talks about the mechanism isn't there, that I totally agree with that, Jared. Is, you know, you hear, you know, from the senior executives, the philosophy of, you know, value-based care, and I'm kind of focusing my comments more on kind of the healthcare payer industry, you know, but then when you start actually working on a contract with people, their mechanisms don't work for that very well. And so all of a sudden you're right back to a fee for service, because that's the way we always have done it. I think that's going to be the challenge. Is I think people like the idea of value-based care. I can tell you we offer a value-based care pricing model as part of our service, and we end up inevitably going back to the basic fee for service kind of model, because that's the way the mechanism works. It'll be interesting coming back to this consumer health versus healthcare industry. If, you know, the consumer health industry, who's not burdened by that mechanism that's been in place for years and years and years, says, we can do value-based care, we'll charge that way. And that, you know, that may accelerate that change faster than the traditional healthcare industry making it happen.
I just have to say, I think one of the biggest barriers that we have to value-based care is we can't agree on the definition of value. And then it depends on who you're talk to. The value to a payer is completely different than a value to a provider or a pharmaceutical company. The value is completely different. And so that's a big, huge hump right there.
Yeah, I use the saying, there's too many, even with a single episode of care, there's too many cooks in the kitchen and they're all working off different recipes. And it's like we have a mix of one care provider who's trying to do a fee for service model with this patient and a value-based care with this patient, and, you know, deal with the Medicare Advantage program over here. And it's just, they can't accommodate all these different models with the one set of patients. And so it kind of needs to be unified.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think you guys hit on a perfect point, different models. And also the complicating factor that a healthcare has is sometimes you don't know what the value is until a year later, right? I mean, so it takes a while for the value of the healthcare to kind of play out.
Valid point.
Well, and Lisa, you even mentioned, you know, the payers, the providers, you know, there are different value definitions within the sector, right? 3 different payers and 3 different providers will all have, ideally, not the same definition of value. So I'm hearing,
and there's just a lot of hoops to jump through to prove value, to Lonnie's point, a lot of hoops. And the hoops keep changing, by the way, and they keep getting smaller.
So for the wannabe entrepreneurs or people starting their businesses not as far along with you guys. So I'm hearing a consensus that, you know, one of the biggest barriers to bringing innovation into this marketplace is, Lonnie, as you said, the mechanisms that are there, as well as the value definition being elusive. So, you know, what are some recommendations you'd give to entrepreneurs coming into healthcare with technology solutions from your lessons learned to help them navigate that world?
My very first thing that I would say is don't start by getting hung up, you know, with things like reimbursement and all of that stuff. The first conversations you have should be with the people that you're going to actually build the experience around. And it has to start with building the best experience for those individuals, consumers, individuals, people, whatever you want to call them. And if you start with that mentality, then I think you can build the rest of it on top of it. But if you start with kind of the traditional healthcare way of thinking about things, is there reimbursement? You know, I think you're starting from the wrong spot.
This is about health economics as well as about health, right? And so understanding your own health economics and what you bring to the table, and then you have to prove it. So for us, we had to build that health economic model just to understand the universe, and then you have to prove it and show the data. You have to have data. Eventually, you have to have the data.
Yeah, my kind of more ground level advice is just have as many conversations with as many different organizations as you can. A lot of times you have your kind of high level theory and your value proposition, and it looks good according to, you know, all the blogs you read and how you understand the system and the economics. And then you go talk to a system and they don't think that way at all. Or you go to a payer and they have a whole different model. And, you know, you've seen one payer provider, you've seen one payer provider. Just have more conversations to understand how that particular organization approaches that, how they define value, and then you can kind of adjust to that.
Well, as we wind toward the end, I always like to, with our panelists, bring things full circle and end with the sort of visionary and hopeful promise that I think each of you are bringing to healthcare today. So final question, I'll let each of you answer it and, you know, kind of give your closing statement. So in the world we want going forward, what does healthcare look like from your perspective in a world where we truly have that consumer centricity that we started the day talking about? And Lisa, you kicked us off. So how about you kick off our close?
Sure. Here's what we know. Home is the new site of service. And our models are changing in that direction. Our job, all of us, you know, government, technology, payers, providers, we need to figure out how we're going to get there in a collaborative manner, in a manner that really serves who we're here to serve. And that is the consumer. That is the person that's in the home that needs care. So this has to be a collaborative effort. We've got to partner together and work together, which is our whole business model, is partnerships, to make that happen.
Lonnie?
Yeah, my ideal vision is that healthcare in the future looks much more like an online shopping experience, right? You are managing your healthcare at home, to Lisa's point, in your phone, using whatever sensors that you need around that, blood test, et cetera. And as your prescription needs come due, they're renewed through your phone and they show up at your doorstep an hour later. That's the way healthcare should be thinking about from a consumer perspective.
Jared?
Yeah, without being too idealistic, I mean, I think the key to the consumerism is the choice, and having the infrastructure to let the best solution win, and tech companies or digital health companies to compete where there's choice, and that will help everybody improve. And I think today we don't have that with the way that payments work and the regulatories. So, you know, I don't know exactly what that is, but I envision this model where that actually becomes practice. And so consumers have a choice to actually choose what the best solution for their health is.
Well, I think we've demonstrated historically, Lonnie, as you referenced that several times, that there's no shortage of daring to dream here in Medical Alley. I want to thank all of you sincerely for taking the time, sharing your experiences. Lisa, Lonnie, Jared, it has been spectacular. Thank you again. And I look forward to participating in a healthcare world that looks like the one that all of you are working hard to create. So thank you for all the work you do. Thank you for helping to distinguish Medical Alley with your leadership. And for our audience, I hope you've enjoyed today's program as much as I have. Please, you can visit us at www.medicalalley.org. Go to our events page where you'll find upcoming webinars like this on topics that are front and center and what we're all dealing with the pandemic and in healthcare. You'll have access to the Medical Alley podcast and a host of other resources and content featuring the leaders of Medical Alley and the great work that they're doing. Again, Jared, Lisa, Lonnie, thank you. For everyone else, have a wonderful rest of your Medical Alley day. Thank you.